Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I grew up in an old apartment building from the 60s. It wasn't run down or anything, just the kind of place where the walls held secrets, where the pipes groaned even when no one was using them. I never thought much of it until I moved back in with my mom for a few months after college. I had a job lined up, but my lease wasn't ready yet, so I crashed in my childhood room. That's when I started noticing the water. It started small, tiny bubbles in my glass after filling it from the tap, even after letting it run for a bit. Then, the water pressure in the shower would randomly spike or weaken, like someone was adjusting it behind the walls. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, I turned on the sink and something moved inside the faucet. Not a bug, not hair, something thick and sinuous, just barely visible as the water rushed past it. It slipped back inside before I could blink, leaving behind a faint, metallic taste in the water. I told my mom and she just sighed and said the plumbing was old, probably rust or mineral buildup. Just let it run for a minute, she said. So I did, but the more I let it run, the worse it got. One night, I woke up to the sound of gurgling. Not a drip, not the usual old pipe noises. This was wet and alive, sloshing and shifting inside the walls. I sat up in bed, listening. The sound traveled, moving from the bathroom to the kitchen, then back. It stopped suddenly. Then the bathroom faucet turned on, and not all the way, just a trickle, but enough for me to hear the water running. I didn't move for what felt like hours, just lay there, barely breathing. The air smelled rugged, damp and metallic, like the inside of an old well. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The faucet was off. My mom was already up, drinking coffee like nothing happened. I almost convinced myself it was a dream, until I went to splash water on my face. There, in the sink, was a clump of something wet and dark. It looked like strands of hair, but when I tried to pull it free, it squirmed. I screamed. My mom came running, but by the time she got there, it was gone. She didn't believe me, of course. That night, I packed my bags. I told my mom my lease was ready early and left before the sun set. I never told her the real reason why. A few months passed before I visited my mom again. I had settled into my new apartment, modern, clean, no weird noises in the walls, no water that smelled like rust and old breath, but I couldn't shake it. The memory of the thing in the pipes lingered, creeping into my thoughts whenever I heard the faint hiss of water running through the building. Sometimes, when I washed my hands, I'd find myself staring at the drain, waiting, expecting. Nothing ever came out. Then, one night, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. Mom, hey, do you know if we have raccoons? What? Mom, I hear something moving around at night. Thought it was in the attic, but I think it's in the pipes. Weird, right? I felt my stomach drop. Get a plumber. Right now. Don't use the sinks. Don't turn on the shower. Just trust me. She left me on read. The next morning, I called. She didn't answer. I tried again. Nothing. By noon, I was in my car, driving back to the apartment. The first thing that hit me when I walked in was the smell. It wasn't sewage. It wasn't mildew. It was worse. Thick, wet, like rotting meat submerged in stagnant water. I called out. The place was quiet. Too quiet. I found her in her bedroom, standing next to the bathroom door, staring at it like she was waiting for it to move. She turned to look at me, and I swear I'd never seen my mother scared before that moment. I think something's in there, she whispered. I reached for the doorknob, and she grabbed my wrist. Don't. The smell seeped from under the door, curling into the room. The light in the bathroom was off, but I could hear it. A soft, wet sloshing, like something was shifting in a thick pool of liquid. Then, the faucet turned on, and not full blast, just a thin, steady stream. A shadow moved in the gap under the door. I grabbed my mom's arm and yanked her out of the room, slamming the bedroom door behind us. We're leaving. I told her. No. We grabbed what we could and got out. She stayed with me for a few days while we called maintenance. They checked the pipes, the drains, the entire building's plumbing system. They found nothing. No clogs, no leaks, no animals. But when they unscrewed the bathroom faucet, one of the workers pulled something out. A long, black strand, slick and wriggling, like hair that was still alive. No one had an explanation. They replaced the pipes, called it a fluke, and left. We sold the apartment a month later. I don't know who lives there now. I don't want to know. I tried to move on, and I really did. My mom relocated to a smaller house closer to family. I settled into my new apartment, making sure it was in a newer building, one with up-to-date plumbing, no strange noises, no history of problems. For a while, everything was normal, until one night, about 2 months later, I had just finished brushing my teeth. As I turned off the sink, I heard that sound, a faint, gurgling slosh wash deep within the pipes. I froze. It had been so long. I almost convinced myself it was my imagination, but when I looked into the mirror, I saw something that made my stomach twist into knots. The water in the sink wasn't draining, not clogged, just stuck, like something was holding it in place. Then a single bubble rose to the surface. The lights flickered. I backed away, heart hammering. My hands were still damp, but I didn't dare try them. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to breathe. Then the drain gave a sickly glurp, and the water was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring into the empty basin, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The next day, I called maintenance. They checked the pipes, found nothing, said it was probably an air pocket or normal plumbing noises. But I knew better. It was testing me. It knew where I was. For the next week, I avoided the bathroom as much as I could. I showered quickly, turned the sink on only when necessary, and never stood too close to the drain. The paranoia only keeps you safe for so long. One night, I was taking a shower when I felt it. A shift in the water pressure. The warm spray turned lukewarm, then cold, then back again. And then a hand, not a real hand, but something brushed against my ankle. I jumped back, slipping on the wet tile, nearly cracking my head against the wall. The shower drain let out a deep, guttural gurgle. The water slowed. Thick, black strands of something slithered up from the drain, moving unnaturally like they were searching for something. From it, I bolted, water still running, shampoo still in my hair. I threw a towel around myself and slammed the bathroom door shut. From the other side, I heard it, a slow, rhythmic drip, 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 then a whisper, not words, not quite, just wet breathing, like something was waiting. I haven't used my bathroom since. I started showering at the gym, brushing my teeth in the kitchen sink. I even considered moving, but deep down, I know it won't matter. They followed me once, they can follow me again. And worst of all, I don't think it lives in the pipes. I think it just uses them. I never liked my aunt's house. It wasn't haunted or anything, not in the usual way, but something about it always made me feel like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't supposed to see. She lived alone in a small town, in one of those old houses with slanted floors and doors that never quite shut right. She collected weird things too, porcelain dolls, antique music boxes, and taxidermy birds with faded glass eyes. But the worst was the doll in the hallway. It wasn't fancy, not like the others. It sat on a shelf outside the guest room where I always stayed when we visited. Its dress was yellowed lace, and its hair was real. Aunt Linda swore it was human, which I hope was just one of her weird jokes. The face was painted, but the eyes were wrong. Not glass, not plastic, just rug. I asked once why she kept it. She told me it had been in the house before she moved in. Some things belong to a place, she said, shrugging. It's easier to leave them be. I always turned it around before bed. I didn't want it facing the guest room. I don't know why. One night, when I was about 14, I woke up needing water. The hallway was dark, but I didn't want to turn on the light and wake my aunt. As I passed the shelf, I noticed the doll had turned back around. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I hadn't turned it as far as I thought. I kept walking. Then, soft and slow, the floor creaked behind me. I turned so fast I almost tripped. The hallway was empty. The doll was still sitting there, but it felt like something was watching me. I hurried to the kitchen, got my water, and practically ran back to bed. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I told my aunt. She just laughed. I told you, she said, some things belong to a place. That was the last time I visited. Aunt Linda passed a few years later, and the house was sold. But a few months ago, I got curious. I looked up the listing photos online. The house was empty, cleaned out, nothing left behind, except for one thing. Sitting on the hallway shelf, just outside the guest room, was the doll, facing the camera. I stared at the listing photo for a long time. The house was stripped bare, no furniture, no decorations, just blank walls and dusty floors. But there it was, the doll, still sitting exactly where it had always been, its head tilted slightly, its wrong eyes staring straight into the camera. I don't know what possessed me, but I saved the image and zoomed in. The resolution wasn't great, but I swore I could see something strange in its face. Like the paint had changed, like the expression had shifted. A week later, I saw the house was sold. That should have been the end of it. But then, the dream started. I would wake up in my old guest room, the one at Aunt Linda's, even though I hadn't been there in years. The house was silent, except for the sound of creaking, soft, deliberate, the kind of sound you hear when something knows you're listening. In the dream, I always tried to move, but I couldn't. I was frozen, staring at the bedroom door, waiting for it to open. And then, in the dim light of the hallway, a shadow would shift. The dream always ended before I could see what it was. Last night, though, something changed. I woke up at 3:12 a.m. My room was silent. No creaking, no movement, just stillness. But my phone was open. The screen was glowing. The photo of the house still pulled up. And the doll, it wasn't in the hallway anymore. It was closer, right at the edge of the doorway. I haven't looked at the picture again. I don't want to, because I know if I do, I'll find it closer. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, a weird glitch in the photo. But deep down, I knew better. That night, I put my phone face down on my nightstand and forced myself to sleep. But the dream came again, same as before. I was back in my aunt's house, lying in the guest bed, the air thick and warm. The creaking was louder this time, closer. I knew I wasn't alone. The bedroom door was cracked open just a sliver, letting in a thin slant of darkness from the hallway. And then I saw it. Fingers, small, pale fingers curling around the edge of the door frame, gripping the wood, not moving, just holding. Something was there, something small, watching. I wanted to wake up. I tried to wake up, but then the door inched open, just enough to see the top of a head, the lace of a yellow dress, the wrong eyes, watching me. I shot up in bed, gasping, heart slamming against my ribs. I wasn't in my aunt's house. I was in my own room, safe. But my phone screen was on again. The photo was open. The doll was no longer in the hallway. It was in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed. There's I don't know what to do. I thought about deleting the photo, but something tells me that won't matter. Because this morning, when I left my apartment, my neighbor stopped me in the hall. She looked pale, uneasy. Hey, weird question, she said, forcing a laugh. Did you, get a new decoration or something? I frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated. I got home late last night, and I could have sworn I saw, I don't know, a little figure standing in your window. I live alone in a small but comfortable apartment. It's nothing special, just a one bedroom with outdated cabinets and a weirdly low shower head. But it's mine. I keep things tidy, but I'm not obsessive. I leave dishes in the sink for a day or two, let laundry pile up on my chair, the usual. Last week, I woke up late for work. I rushed out the door without making my bed, my coffee mug left half full on the counter. When I got home that evening, the bed was made. The dishes were gone. The coffee mug sat in the dish rack, completely clean. At first, I assumed I must have done it without thinking. I was groggy that morning, maybe I was on autopilot, but over the next few days, it kept happening. I'd leave something out, and when I returned, it was put away. My laundry folded itself, the trash emptied without me remembering taking it out. I started paying attention. I took pictures before leaving for work, making sure I wasn't imagining things. But every time I came back, the room looked slightly better than I left it. Even things I didn't remember misplacing were suddenly in their perfect spots. I set up my phone to record. I positioned it facing my kitchen, where most of the strange activity happened. The next morning, I deliberately spilled some rice on the counter. I left an empty cereal bowl on the table. Then I went to work, giddy but nervous. When I got home, everything was spotless. The rice, the bell, back in the cabinet. My hands were shaking as I checked the footage. I expected something weird, but what I saw made my stomach drop. At exactly 1:47 p.m., the footage glitched. It didn't cut off, just a single frame of static, and when the image returned, the mess was gone. There was no movement, no person, no shadows, just a clean counter. I couldn't sleep that night. I left my room a disaster, papers on the floor, clothes draped over the furniture, dishes stacked in the sink. At 1:47 a.m., I sat awake, staring at my bedroom door, waiting. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear cleaning. But when I got up in the morning, everything was immaculate. I checked the footage again. Another static frame at exactly 1:47. I don't know who or what is doing this. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I stayed home, barely breathing, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. The apartment felt eerily normal, like it always had. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. The hum of the fridge filled the silence. The only difference was the message on my phone. Please don't make a mess today. I wanted to ignore it. Maybe it was some weird bug, an old note I had somehow forgotten about. But deep down, I knew better. I spent the day moving as little as possible. I didn't cook, didn't drink anything but bottled water. I placed the empty bottle in the trash as neatly as I could. I even fluffed the pillows before sitting down. And when 1:47 p.m. arrived, I sat completely still, gripping my phone like a lifeline. Nothing happened. No glitch, no static. I even checked my camera footage, just a normal, uninterrupted recording of me sitting there, staring at the walls like an idiot. It was relief. For a moment, maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe I was stressed, overworked, losing track of time. That relief lasted until 1:47 a.m. I had fallen asleep on the couch, my phone resting on my chest. A sharp vibration woke me, a new notification. Thank you. That was it. No number, no sender. Just those two words, sitting on my screen like a cold whisper. I didn't sleep after that. that. I kept the lights on, listening for anything unusual, but the apartment stayed silent. The next day, I pushed it further. I left one thing out, a spoon on the counter, just a spoon. The test. At 1:47 p.m., it disappeared. No static, no distortion this time. It was just gone. I checked the drawers, the sink, even the trash. Nothing. I didn't leave anything out that night. But at 1:47 a.m., I woke up anyway, not to a notification, not to a sound, but to the feeling that something was watching me. I stayed completely still, my breath shallow. The apartment was dark, but my eyes adjusted. The door to my bedroom was cracked open, and I swear I saw movement inside, not footsteps, not a shadow, just the faintest shift in my bedsheets, like something was smoothing them out. I drove for hours, not really knowing where I was headed. I just needed to be away from that place, from whatever was watching me, from whatever had been cleaning my apartment without me ever seeing it. I ended up at a cheap motel off the highway, the guy with flickering neon signs and an overworked clerk who barely looked up when I checked in. The room smelled like stale air and old carpet, but I didn't care. I locked the door, pulled the chain across it, and collapsed onto the bed fully clothed. I told myself I'd sleep, that exhaustion would win, but I couldn't, because my phone, still in my pocket, buzzed. I stared at it, my fingers trembling as I reached for it. A part of me didn't want to look, didn't want to know, but I did. Where did you go? I dropped the phone like it burned me. My stomach twisted. It knew I was gone. I turned the phone off, stuffed it in my bag, and tried to convince myself I was safe here. I wasn't. At 1:47 a.m., I woke up, not because of a phone notification this time, because I heard something, a faint sound, barely more than a whisper, a shuffling, like fabric brushing against itself. It was coming from the bathroom. I held my breath, heart pounding. The motel room was small. I could see most of it from where I lay. The main door was locked, the windows shut, but the bathroom door, which had been fully open when I went to bed, was now just slightly ajar. I hadn't touched it. I wasn't alone. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, slowly, deliberately, the door began to close. Not a gust of air, not a loose hinge. Something on the other side was pulling it shut. I bolted, didn't bother grabbing my bag, didn't bother turning off the lights. I just ran, yanking open the door and sprinting down the empty motel corridor, my bare feet slamming against the cheap carpeting. The night clerk stared at me as I burst into the lobby, gasping. "You okay?" I couldn't answer. I just shook my head. "Green problems?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Want another blunt?" I glanced back toward the hallway, my skin crawling. No, I didn't want another room. I wanted out. I left everything behind, clothes, wallet, phone. Just got in my car and drove. I didn't stop until I saw a gas station where I used a payphone to call my brother. Told him I needed a place to stay. I didn't explain why. That was 3 days ago. I haven't checked my phone since. Haven't gone back to the motel. But last night, my brother knocked on my guest room door, holding something. "Dude," he said, looking confused. "This just got delivered for you." It was a small package, no return address. I opened it. Inside was my phone. Turned off, it's fully charged. It was a late fall afternoon, one of those weird days when the sun sets way too early and the whole world feels off. I was in my senior year, exhausted from exams, and I had one last class before I could finally go home. My professor was notoriously strict about attendance, and I was already cutting it close. I rushed into the lecture hall just as the door was closing behind me. Something was wrong. The usual rustling of papers, muted conversations, and shuffling backpacks were missing. Instead, the room was silent, dead silent. I hesitated near the doorway. The class was full, but no one was talking. Everyone sat still, facing forward, back stiff and rigid. They weren't on their phones. They weren't writing notes. They weren't even breathing heavily. It was unsettling. Still, I had made it, and I didn't want to risk losing my grade over a weird vibe. I found an empty seat in the middle and sat down, trying not to look around too obviously. At the front of the room, the professor stood by the whiteboard, but I didn't recognize them. I had taken this course all semester. I knew who was supposed to be teaching. This wasn't Dunham, the figure at the front, because I don't know if I could even call them a person, had their back turned, writing something on the board in long, spidery strokes. The letters were too large, too stretched, as if their hand didn't quite understand human proportions. The words didn't make sense. They weren't in English. They weren't in any language I recognized. I turned to the person sitting next to me, whispering, "Is this the right class?" They didn't respond. I reached out, lightly tapping their arm. Their skin was ice cold. I pulled my hand back, heart pounding. That was when I noticed the professor had stopped writing. They were still facing the board, but their head twitched like they had just heard something they weren't supposed to. The room felt suddenly too small. The air was thick, like breathing through syrup. I needed to leave. As calmly as I could, I grabbed my bag and stood up. No one else moved. No one even blinked. I walked up the aisle, careful not to make a sound, my whole body screaming to run, run, run. The professor still didn't turn around, but as I reached the door, I swear to God, I heard them whisper, "Wrong class." I yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway, my chest heaving. The second I was out, the sounds of campus life came rushing back. Footsteps, conversations, the distant hum of vending machines. I turned around. The room I had just been in, empty, completely empty. No students, no desks, no professor, just a dark, unused classroom. I never found out what happened. I never told anyone, but for the rest of the semester, I made damn sure to double check every single room before walking inside. For weeks after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into something I wasn't meant to see. It wasn't just paranoia, it was something deeper, something in my bones. Like the memory of that room had sunk into me, and my body remembered. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had walked into the wrong lecture hall by accident. Maybe I was exhausted and imagined the whole thing. But then, things started to change. The first time was settled. I sat down in my actual class the next week, surrounded by familiar faces, safe in the knowledge that this was the right place. Then I noticed a writing on my notebook. I hadn't written it. Scrawled in the margin, in long, spidery strokes, was the phrase, "Wrong class." I slammed the notebook shut, my pulse hammering. No one else seemed to notice. No one was watching me, but I felt watched. It got worse. A few nights later, I woke up to my phone buzzing. I fumbled for it, still half asleep. The screen was black. No call, no messages, just vibrating. Then it stopped. A few seconds later, my laptop screen flickered on, even though I hadn't touched it. The browser was open to my university's website. My class schedule was pulled up, but there was an extra course listed, one I had never signed up for. Unregistered course, lecture hall B12. The location was familiar. It was that room, the one that shouldn't exist. I slammed my laptop shut and turned every single light on in my dorm. I didn't sleep that night. I tried to ignore it, but the more I resisted, the more it followed me. Campus maps would glitch when I looked up my classes, flashing the name of that non-existent course. When I walked past certain buildings, I'd see the reflection of the lecture hall in the glass, even when I wasn't anywhere near it. Then, one day, a notification popped up on my phone. Reminder, your next lecture begins soon. Room B12. I wasn't even holding my phone when it appeared. I was done. I shut my phone off, grabbed my keys, and decided I was going home for the weekend. Maybe longer. I needed to be away from campus, away from whatever the hell was happening. But as I rushed through the student center, heart pounding, I saw them. The students from that room, sitting together at a table, just staring at me. No food, no laptops, no conversation, just watching. One of them, a girl I swore hadn't blinked since I first saw her, smiled. Then she whispered something. I couldn't hear it, but I knew what she said. Wrong class. That was it. I read. I stayed home for 2 weeks, pretending I had some family emergency. My professors didn't question it, but on the last night before I was supposed to return, I woke up to find my laptop screen on again. This time, it was an email. No sender, no subject, just a single message. You left early. You should come back. Your seat is still waiting. I dropped out the next morning. I don't know what that class was. I don't know who or what was in that room. Dropping out should have been the end of it. It wasn't. I left campus that morning, feeling like I had barely escaped something massive, something hungry. My parents weren't happy about my decision, but they knew better than to push me on it. I convinced myself I was free. For a while, nothing happened. No strange emails. No students staring at me. No whispers. Then I got my first piece of mail. It was from my university. At first, I thought it was some generic alumni thing, but when I opened it, there was only one piece of paper inside. No letterhead, no return address, just a class schedule. And one course was listed, unregistered course, lecture hall B12. I threw it away. Then the email started again. Every few weeks, I get a new one. No sender, no subject, just a single sentence. You are still enrolled. I ignored them. I blocked every unknown email. I changed my address. I even moved to a new city. It didn't matter. I got a new job at a bookstore. It was a nice, quiet job. No connection to my old school. No reason for anyone to know me. One night, as I was closing up, I heard something strange. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor. It was coming from the back, where we had a small community reading area. I was alone. I slowly walked over, heart in my throat. The chairs had been arranged in rows, like a classroom. In the very back row, a single notebook sat open. I knew what would be inside before I even touched it, but I looked anyway. Wrong class. I read. That was a year ago. I don't know what they want. I don't know why I was pulled into that room, or why they won't let me go. I've moved 3 times. I don't stay anywhere for long. I don't keep in touch with old friends. students, but every so often I'll see them on the subway, at the grocery store, in my peripheral vision on dark streets, the students from the room, sitting perfectly still, watching me, and I know deep in my bones that one day I won't see them watching anymore. One day they'll be waiting. I work as a receptionist for a mid-sized office building. It's mostly a quiet job. Most people in direct deliveries answer calls. The building itself is older, one of those places where the wiring hums in the walls and the intercom system hasn't been updated since the early 90s. It was a regular Tuesday night. I was working late to cover for a coworker, and the last few employees had left hours ago. By 9 p.m., it was just me and the janitor, Marisol, who was vacuuming on another floor. That's when the intercom buzzed. I glanced at the panel. Each button was labeled with a floor number, and there was a general call button that broadcasted to every speaker in the building. The light next to it was blinking. Someone was using the general call. Oh, hello, I said into the receiver. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then a voice, "Are you still there?" The words were clear, but the voice itself was strange, flat, like someone was reading off a script but didn't really understand the meaning behind the words. "This is the front desk," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Who is this?" A pause. Then, "Are you still there?" The exact same words, the exact same tone. I frowned and glanced at the security monitors. Most of the cameras were grainy, but they covered every hallway and entrance. No movement, no one near the intercom stations. "This is a restricted system," I said, forcing authority into my voice. "If you're trying to play a prank, these easy to." The intercom cut me off. Then every button on the panel lit up at once. Every single floor, every single speaker, and from each one, layered over each other, the same voice. "Are you still there?" I nearly knocked my chair over, backing away from the desk. The voice was slightly out of sync across all the speakers, creating this eerie, echoing chorus. And then silence. The lights on the intercom shut off all at once. I grabbed the walkie-talkie from my desk and called Marisol. "Hey, are you near the intercom right now?" My voice came out shaky. A short pause, then her voice crackled through. "No, why?" I swallowed hard. "You didn't hear that?" Another pause. "Hear what?" I didn't know how to explain, so I just told her to come downstairs. A few minutes later, she showed up at the front desk, mop in hand, looking confused. I asked if anyone else was in the building. She shook her head. I locked the stairwell doors when I finished the second floor. She said, "No one's up there." I checked the security system again. Still no movement. Marisol gave me a weird look and said I should go home if I was feeling jumpy. I almost agreed, but something wasn't sitting right with me. I pulled up the logs for the intercom system. It was old, but it still recorded button presses. There it was, a general call made at 8:53 p.m. right when I got that first message. And the source, the basement intercom. The basement was only used for storage. It was locked at all times. I grabbed the key from my desk and told Marisol to stay put. I took the elevator down, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. The basement smelled like old cardboard and dust. My footsteps echoed against the concrete floor. The intercom was mounted on the wall near the maintenance room door. I walked up to it, my heart pounding. There was no way anyone had been down here, right? The dust on the floor was undisturbed. No footprints, no sign of movement. I reached out and touched the speaker grill. It was warm, like someone had been using it. I backed away slowly, feeling the weight of the silence pressing in. Then, just as I turned to leave, the intercom clicked on and I froze. A burst of static, then whispering, just barely audible, "Are you still there?" I didn't wait to hear more. I read, and I wish I could say that was the end of it, that I left the job, moved on, and never thought about that night again. But things didn't stop when I quit. The first time it happened outside of work, I was at home, trying to unwind with some late night TV. My apartment was small, a cheap studio with thin walls, the kind where you could hear your neighbor sneeze through the plaster. The TV flickered for a second, the screen distorting into static. Then, just as suddenly, it was fine. I brushed it off, then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I normally don't answer those, but something, curiosity, dread, I don't know, made me pick up. I pressed the phone to my ear. Silence. Then, through the speaker, "Are you still there?" I hung up immediately. My whole body felt cold, like my blood had turned to ice. There was no way. There was no way. I turned off my phone, paced my apartment, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next night, it happened again. This time, through my laptop. I was scrolling through job listings when my screen flickered. The audio on my headphones crackled. Then, softly, layered under the static, "Are you still there?" I slammed my laptop shut. It wasn't just the intercom anymore. It was following me. I stopped using my electronics after that. I kept my phone off, only turning it on to check texts from my mom. I avoided my laptop, my TV, anything that could reproduce sound, but I didn't need those anymore. 3 nights later, I was woken up by a knock. At first, I thought it was a dream. I sat up, listening, nothing. Then another knock, not at my door, at my closet. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. The door was slightly ajar, just a dark sliver of space visible. Look. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. My fingers trembled as I pointed it toward the closet. Nothing, just clothes, hangers, the usual mess. Then my phone screen glitched. For half a second, just a blink, the flashlight flickered, and in that instant, I saw it. A shape, not a person, not a shadow, something else. It was crouched deep in the closet, its form hunched and wrong. Its face, if you could call it that, was indistinct, blurred like a low-resolution image, shifting like it wasn't meant to be seen. Then, gone. I read. I didn't stop running until I was outside, standing barefoot in the cold, heart hammering so hard I thought I'd pass out. I called a friend and crashed at their place for the next week. When I finally worked up the nerve to go back, I found my apartment door unlocked. Inside, nothing was taken, nothing was out of place, except for my laptop, which was open on my desk. The screen was black, the cursor blinking in the center. A single line of text had been typed out. Are you still there? I moved out the next day. I don't know what I encountered that night at the office. I don't know how it found me, how it latched on, but I haven't heard from it since. I keep my phone on silent. I avoid intercoms. I moved halfway across the country. I left my job, cut off contact with anyone who worked at that building, and tried to start over. New apartment, new phone, new everything. For a while, it worked. For almost a year, nothing happened. Then, one night, my doorbell rang. It was late, too late for visitors. My stomach clenched as I walked to the peephole, heart pounding. The hallway outside was empty. I stood there, waiting, my breath shallow. Maybe a prank, maybe a glitch in the system. Then, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but deep down, I knew. I pressed the phone to my ear, my hand already shaking. Silence, then a breath. Are you still there? I dropped the phone. It had found me. This time, I didn't wait for things to escalate. I packed a bag and checked into a motel. I spent the night jumping at shadows, the flickering neon sign outside my window casting strange shapes on the walls. Nothing happened. I spent the next few days researching. I needed to know, had anyone else ever experienced this? Had anyone else ever heard those words? I searched forums, old internet threads, paranormal sites. I even went deep into the dark web, looking for anything that matched what I'd been through. I found one thing, a post from 2011, buried in an abandoned forum. The intercom spoke to me. I was alone in the building. It asked if I was still there. I thought it was a prank, but now it's in my home. I don't know how it followed me. It won't stop asking. I think if I answer it, something bad will happen. That was it. No replies, no follow-up. The user's account had been deleted. I felt sick. This had happened before, and whoever posted that, they were gone. I knew then that I had to do something different. I couldn't keep running, so I went back to my apartment. I sat in the dark, my phone on the table, my laptop open in front of me, and I waited. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands clenched into fists. Then, at 3:12 a.m., my speakers crackled. Not my phone, not the intercom, my laptop. The text-to-speech function had turned on by itself, and in that same, flat, empty voice, it spoke, "Are you still there?" I swallowed hard. My whole body was trembling. This time, I didn't run. This time, I answered, "Yes," I whispered. For a second, nothing happened. Then my screen glitched. The lights in my apartment flickered. A horrible, sharp whine came through the speakers, like feedback from a microphone pressed too close to an amplifier. And then silence. The air in my apartment felt lighter, like a pressure I hadn't even realized was there had suddenly lifted. My laptop shut off, and then nothing. No voice, no calls, no knocks. It was gone. That was 2 years ago. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know why answering made it stop. Maybe it just needed acknowledgement. Maybe it wanted me to break the pattern. Or maybe I passed it on. I still check forums sometimes, looking for anyone posting about strange intercom calls, weird voices, the same question. So far, nothing. But if you ever hear a voice crackling over a speaker, a phone, a radio, if it asks you, "Are you still there?" don't ignore it. I was living alone in a small apartment, working the night shift at a hospital. My schedule was completely flipped. I slept during the day and was awake while the world was quiet. It wasn't uncommon for me to get scam calls or wrong numbers at odd hours, so when my phone rang at around 3 a.m. one night, I barely glanced at the caller ID before answering. Hello. There was silence. Not static, just silence, like someone was holding their breath. Hello. I repeated, and then click, the call ended. I shrugged it off and went back to scrolling on my phone. Probably just a misdiagnosis dial. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Same number. This time, I hesitated before answering. Hello. A pause. Then, a woman's voice. I'm sorry. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. There was something in the way she said it that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Oh, it's okay. I replied awkwardly. Who is this? No answer. Click. Now I was officially creeped out. My first thought was that it was a prank, but something about the tone in her voice unsettled me. It wasn't playful. It wasn't even eerie in an intentional horror movie way. It sounded regretful. I didn't go back to scrolly this time. Instead, I put my phone on silent and set its screen down on the table. If it was important, she'd leave a voicemail. She didn't, but she did text. My phone vibrated once. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. Unknown number. You shouldn't be here. Now I was done. I blocked the number and turned my phone off for the night. The next day, I went about my routine as usual. I had almost convinced myself it was some weird spam bot or a wrong number that just happened to be unnerving. Until I got to work, I checked my locker before my shift, and there, taped to the door, was a small, folded piece of paper. No name, no markings, just a note. I unfolded it. You shouldn't be here. Same words, same message. I spun around, expecting what? Someone watching me. A prank. But the break room was empty. I reported it to security, but they brushed it off as a practical joke from a coworker. I checked my phone. No new calls, no new texts. Nothing else happened that night, but I never stopped thinking about it, because 2 days later, during my shift, a patient coded in the exact hallway I would have been standing in if I hadn't stopped to talk to security. If I had gone to my normal post without delay, I would have been the one in the path of the crash cart. And when the commotion settled, and I was left alone for a moment, my phone buzzed again. A new number. Almost did. One final message. You're welcome. I stared at my phone. You're welcome. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. My fingers felt cold, too stiff to move, but I forced myself to type out a reply. Who is this? No response. I watched the message status. Delivered. Not read. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go to security again. They already thought I was being paranoid, so I deleted the message and tried to push it out of my mind. I tried. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her whispery voice in my head. I'm sorry. I stared at my phone, debating whether to turn it off completely. Instead, I put it on silent and slid it under my pillow. When I woke up the next evening, there was a voicemail. No call history, just a voicemail. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. The message was 47 seconds long. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the play button. Then I pressed it. At first, it was nothing, just silence, maybe the faintest hint of breathing. Then the whisper, you weren't supposed to stay. I froze, my whole body locked up, muscles tensed, like my brain was trying to keep me from moving. The whisper continued, but it wasn't a message this time. It was names. Names I recognized, co-workers, patients, people I knew, each one spoken softly, deliberately, like she was reading from a list. Then, the final name, lied. I dropped my phone in. The voicemail was still playing, but I couldn't pick it up. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, like I had forgotten how to breathe properly. And then the message ended, but before it cut off completely, before the automatic tone signaling the end, there was one last whisper, one by one, and then click. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at my phone like it might come alive in my hands. When I finally had the nerve to check my call logs, I wasn't surprised. No record of the voicemail, nothing in my history, nothing in my deleted messages, but I had heard it, and what scared me more than anything was that first sentence. You weren't supposed to stay. I called in sick that night, and the next, and the night after that. One of the names on that list, one of my co-workers, died in an accident. A week later, another name, a patient, complications, and one by one, over the next few months, I watched the names vanish. Some moved away, some quit, some didn't make it, but not me, because I left. I transferred hospitals, I moved states, I cut contact with everyone from that time in my life. For years, I tried to forget. I moved on, found a new hospital, made new friends, settled into a routine where I didn't jump every time my phone buzzed. I convinced myself it was all some bizarre coincidence, grief playing tricks on my mind, stress warping my perception. Until 2 weeks ago, I was on break, scrolling on my phone in the hospital cafeteria when I got a FaceTime request from no caller ID. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen that in years. My first instinct was to ignore it, to throw my phone across the table and pretend I never saw it. But my hands moved on their own. I answered. The screen stayed black for a moment, and I felt like I had made a horrible mistake. Then, a face appeared. It was blurry, the camera shifting, like someone holding the phone at a bad angle, but I could still see her. A woman, long, dark hair, hollowed eyes, like she hadn't slept in years. Lips parted, as if she was about to speak but had forgotten how. Then she did. You left. A whisper, not angry, not accusing, just a fact. My breath caught in my throat. My brain screamed at me to end the call, but but I couldn't. I was frozen. The screen flickered, the camera wobbled again, the angle shifting as if she was moving, and suddenly I wasn't just looking at her. I was looking at a hospital room, not just any room, a room on my floor. I recognized the bed, the window placement, the IV stand in the corner. It was my hospital. She was here. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, but before I could react, the camera moved again, closer to the bed. There was a patient lying there. Tubes, monitors, the steady beep of a heart rate monitor in the background, and then I saw their face. It was May. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the cafeteria table. The call's still going, but I couldn't bring myself to pick it up. I was awake. I was here. I wasn't in a hospital bed. I was sitting in the cafeteria. I was breathing. The call ended. I stared at my phone, my chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths. A text came in from no caller ID. 4 words, "It's not over yet." I left work that night and never went back. The next day, I found out that a patient had died in that same hospital room. Unexpected complications. The name wasn't one I recognized, but that didn't matter. I was never much of a reader. I don't say that with pride, just honesty. Growing up, I preferred movies, video games, anything but books. But when my laptop broke last month and I couldn't afford a replacement, I found myself at the old public library for the first time since high school. It was an eerie place, and not because of any ghost stories. It was just forgotten, a relic. The floors creaked like they were complaining, the fluorescent lights hummed too loudly, and some flickered erratically like they were running out of life. Dust clung to the air, and the place smelled like old pages and something stale underneath. I went to the computers near the back to check my emails. They were slow, ancient things, the kind with beige towers and clunky keyboards. There was only one other person in the library, an older woman hunched over a newspaper in the farthest corner. The librarian at the front desk barely looked up when I entered. It started when I tried to log in. That password wouldn't work. I typed it carefully, slowly, still wrong. Frustrated, I clicked forgot password, but before I could reset it, the computer screen flickered and the browser suddenly closed. A single line of text appeared on the screen. "Welcome back." I frowned. That wasn't normal. Maybe an old startup message. I pressed the spacebar and the text disappeared. The browser reopened on its own, but instead of my email, it showed something else, an archive page from 2007. It took me a second to recognize it. It was my old MySpace page. I felt a jolt of nostalgia mixed with confusion. I hadn't logged into that account in over a decade. The screen scrolled by itself, moving past embarrassing old posts, pixelated profile pictures, and friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Then it stopped on a blog post I didn't remember writing. "The last time you were here." I stared at the title, my stomach tightening. That wasn't something I wrote. I clicked on it. The post had a timestamp, November 3rd, 2007. I was in high school then. The post only had one sentence. The hairs on my arms stood up. I had no memory of this. I scrolled down, but there were no replies, no likes. Just that single, ominous sentence. A soft creak echoed behind me. I turned sharply, expecting to see the librarian, but no one was there. The old woman in the corner hadn't moved. The place was dead silent, except for the low hum of the lights. I turned back to the computer, my fingers unsteady on the mouse. I tried to close the page, but the screen froze again. Then a new message appeared, letter by letter, like someone was typing directly onto my screen. "Look to your right." I didn't want to. My pulse hammered as I slowly turned my head. There was nothing but rows of bookshelves. At least, that's what I thought, until I saw the gap between two of them, just a few feet away. Someone was standing there, barely visible between the books. Not a man, not a shadow, just eyes watching me. I shot out of my chair, heart pounding, and nearly tripped over my own feet. By the time I steadied myself and looked back, the eyes were gone. The space between the books was empty. I grabbed my bag and rushed to the exit, but as I passed the front desk, the librarian finally looked up. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something off about it. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just pushed open the door and left. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes watching me through the bookshelves. White, unblinking, calculating. By morning, I had almost convinced myself I imagined it, that it was a trick of the light, or maybe my own paranoia. But that excuse didn't explain the MySpace page. It didn't explain the librarian's words. "You found it, didn't you?" Found what? I wanted to let it go. I should have let it go. But the moment I'd opened my laptop at work and saw my email login, I hesitated. That weird archive page, it wasn't some random glitch. Someone, something, had accessed my old account. and that made it could happen again. I caved. That night, I went back to the library. The building was nearly empty, just like before. The librarian wasn't at the front desk this time, and the old woman who had been reading in the corner was gone. I felt a twinge of relief. No witnesses to how ridiculous I probably looked, creeping toward the computer section like I expected something to jump out at me. I sat at the same station and hesitated before touching the keyboard. Okay, I muttered to myself, if this was real, prove it. I opened a blank document, typed, "Who are you?" For a long time, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered and my words vanished. New text replaced them. You came back. I swallowed hard. I felt cold, even though the library's old heaters hummed softly in the background. I typed again, "What do you want?" The response was immediate. "To remind you." Remind me what? I tried to think back to high school, to the last time I was in this library. I barely remembered. I had never been much of a reader. Why would I have spent time here? Then another line appeared on the screen. November 3 RD 2007. The date from the MySpace post. I tried to think, what was I doing that day? Who was I with? But my mind was blank. I should have been able to remember something. I typed, "I don't understand." The cursor blinked. The computer screen glitched slightly, distorting the text for a moment. Then a single word appeared. Basement. I froze. I had never been in the library's basement. I wasn't even sure if it had one, but something deep in my gut told me it did. And worse, it told me I'd been there before. I pushed back from the desk, glancing around. The library was still empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me, a low, sickly hum. The desk, the chairs, the bookshelves. Then my eyes landed on something new. At the far end of the room, past the last row of shelves, there was a door. A door I swore hadn't been there before. It was slightly open, and from the darkness beyond it, a faint creaking sound echoed, like footsteps on stairs. Going down. I should have left. I wanted to leave, but something about that open door made my chest tighten. The library wanted me to remember something. The door wasn't supposed to be there. I stood frozen, staring at the narrow gap between the door and its frame. Beyond it, the darkness stretched downward. I couldn't see any stairs, but I could feel them. And worse, I could feel something waiting. But waiting for what? I had two choices. Walk away and pretend none of this was happening, or step through that door and see what the library was trying to show me. I should have left. I stepped forward instead. The air beyond the door was thick, heavy, like stepping into a forgotten place where time had settled in and never moved again. The stairwell was colder than the rest of the library, despite the heaters humming above. I reached out and felt the wall, searching for a light switch. Nothing. My phone. I pulled it out, turning on the flashlight. A weak, bluish glow spilled down the steps, revealing a narrow cement staircase that spiraled downward. The walls were concrete, rough and unfinished. This wasn't an ordinary basement. It felt older, like it had been here before the library itself. Each step groaned under my weight as I descended. The air smelled damp, but there was something else beneath it, something rotten. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into a small, windowless room. My flashlight flickered slightly, the beam catching something strange. The chair, just a single, wooden chair in the center of the room, and scrawled across the walls, over and over in jagged handwriting, "Do you remember now?" My breath hitched. The writing wasn't old. The ink looked fresh, but I turned sharply, hard hammering. Someone had been down here recently. That's when I saw it, something tucked into the chair, barely visible in the dim light. A small, battered notebook. I hesitated before reaching for it. The cover was peeling, the edges worn. When I flipped it open, my stomach lurched. It was my handwriting, pages and pages of it. I skimmed through frantic entries, scrawled too fast, too messy. Some sentences were underlined over and over. My name was written multiple times, like I had been trying to remind myself of something. And then, November 3rd, 2007, I forced myself to read. They locked the door. I thought it was a joke at first, but they never came back. The lights don't work. It's too dark down here. It smells wrong. I keep hearing something at the bottom of the stairs. Something breathing. Something waiting. My hands were shaking. I turned the page. It talks to me. It knows my name. It says it remembers me. I don't want to remember it. Another page. I can't leave. I can't leave. I can't leave. My vision blurred. I flipped to the last written page. If I forget again, don't come back. A sharp creak made my breath catch. I whipped around, shining my flashlight at the stairs. The door at the top was closing. No, not closing. It was being pulled shut. I ran. I lunged up the stairs, shoving my shoulder against the door just as it slammed. It didn't budge. My flashlight flickered wildly as I pounded against the wood. Head, let me out. Silence. Then a whisper right against the other side of the door. You came back. My blood turned to ice. I staggered backward down the steps, my flashlight beam trembling. My phone screen suddenly flickered, and before I could react, it shut off. The light was gone. I grew up in a pretty boring suburban neighborhood. It wasn't exactly the kind of place you'd expect anything creepy to happen. The worst thing kids talked about was the occasional half-buried shopping cart in the creek near the drainage tunnels. That was our haunted house. One summer, my best friend Leela and I got bored and decided to explore those tunnels. We weren't stupid, we brought flashlights and stayed near the openings. The tunnels were damp, smelled like rust, and echoed weirdly. The deeper you went, the more they sloped downward, and eventually they led to a larger runoff chamber. That was where we found the dollhouse. It wasn't a normal dollhouse either. It was big, almost as tall as my waist, and looked handmade. The wood was dark and damp, like it had been down there a long time. The windows had tiny, actual glass panes. It was beautiful in a creepy way, but the weirdest part, the furniture inside didn't look fake. It looked real. Tiny chairs, a tiny grandfather clock, even a little porcelain tea set with delicate floral designs. It didn't feel like a toy. It felt like a shrunken house. Leela dared me to open the front panel. It was on tiny hinges, like a real house with a working door. Inside, there were little figurines, not dolls. They weren't plastic or porcelain. They were, I don't know. I still don't know. They felt soft, almost fleshy, but they were stiff, like they had dried that way. There were 6 of them, a tiny woman in a long dress, a man in an old-fashioned suit, a boy, a girl, a baby, and a 6th figure sitting at the little wooden dining table. It wasn't like the others. It didn't look human. It was smaller, hunched, almost like an insect that had been forced into human shape. Its face was blank, just smooth. Leela nudged me. Look, she pointed to the floor of the dollhouse. There were tiny, dried footprints leading out of the house. I suddenly felt sick. The air in the tunnel felt heavier, like we were being watched. I grabbed Leela's arm and said, "Let's go." She hesitated, then nodded. We turned and ran back toward the opening. Just as we reached the light, Leela screamed. I turned, and in the darkness of the tunnel behind us, just before the shadows swallowed the dollhouse completely, something moved. Something small. Something crawly. We never went back. I don't know what it was, or how that house got there. For years, I tried to convince myself we had imagined it. The dollhouse, the tiny figures, the thing that moved. Maybe it was a rat, maybe it was a trick of the light. But even as I got older, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been real. That something in that tunnel had noticed us. Leela and I never spoke about it after that day. We drifted apart in high school, as people do, but whenever we saw each other, there was a quiet understanding. We don't talk about the tunnel. But then, last summer, something happened that made me question everything. I was back in my hometown for a weekend visit, and out of curiosity, I walked past the old drainage tunnels. The area had been fenced off, but the tunnels were still there, gaping black mouths in the cracked concrete. I told myself I wasn't going in. I just wanted to see if it still gave me that awful feeling. It did. As I stood there, peering in, I heard something. A soft tap tap tap, like tiny feet on wet concrete. I turned and left, walking fast but not running. Running would mean I believed something was behind me, and I didn't want to believe that. That night, I had a dream. I was inside a house. Not my parents' house, not anywhere I recognized, but it felt familiar. The furniture was old, heavy wood. The windows were tall and thin, with lace curtains. There was a fireplace, and on the mantel above it, a row of tiny figurines. 6 of them. I tried to move, but my body didn't respond. I was just standing there, staring at the figures. Then, very slowly, one of them turned its head. Not the human ones. The 6th one, its blank, featureless face tilted up toward me. And then, in a voice like dry leaves rustling, it whispered, "He left the door open." I woke up gasping. My room was dark. Too dark. The street lights outside should have been casting their usual glow, but my window was pitch black, like something was pressed against it, blocking the light. And then a faint tap 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 against the glass. I didn't look. I wouldn't look. I yanked the blanket over my head and squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering. Eventually, the tapping stopped. That wooden chair stayed on my nightstand for weeks. I didn't touch it. I didn't throw it away. I just left it there, as if ignoring it would make it less real. I told myself someone was playing a prank on me. Maybe Leela had snuck into my room somehow. Maybe it was a coincidence. But deep down, I knew that thing. The 6th figure had followed me. After a while, I convinced myself I was overreacting. The dream, the tapping, the chair, none of it meant anything. Life went on. I moved to a different city, started a new job, made new friends. For a long time, nothing happened. And then, 2 months ago, I got a message from Leela. "Did you dream about the house?" I stared at my phone for a long time before replying. "What house?" She sent back a single picture. It was a drawing, done in shaky pen strokes on a napkin. A 2-story house with tall windows, lace curtains, a dark, gaping fireplace, and on the mantel, 6 tiny figures. "I keep dreaming about it," she wrote, "and I think it's getting closer." I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to say anything. I thought about blocking her, about pretending I had never seen the message. Then she sent another one. "Do you remember what it said to you?" I felt cold all over. What said to me? I typed. It took her a long time to respond. The 6th one, the thing in the chair. chair. I felt sick. I didn't want to answer, but my fingers moved anyway. It said, "You left the door open." There was no response for several minutes. Then mine said, "Not much longer now." I dropped my phone in. I live in a small town where nothing ever really happens. We have one grocery store, one gas station, and a few scattered shops on the main road. It's the kind of place where you recognize most faces, even if you don't know their names. About 3 months ago, I went to the grocery store to pick up a few things after work. It was a typical Wednesday, nothing unusual. I grabbed some bread, milk, and snacks, went to the self-checkout, and paid. I remember because the machine had trouble reading my card, and an older employee had to help me. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago. I went back, same routine, but when I walked in, I got this weird feeling like deja vu, but wrong. The cashier, a girl in her early 20s, smiled at me as I grabbed a basket. "Back so soon," she said. I hesitated. "I haven't been here in a couple of weeks." She laughed. "You were just here an hour ago." I frowned. "No, I wasn't." She gave me a strange look, but I shrugged it off and went to grab my groceries. Maybe she was mistaking me for someone else. When I got to the bread aisle, I froze. There was a loaf of bread sitting right in the middle of the shelf, separate from the others, in the exact same spot where I had grabbed mine last time. Same brand, same packaging, slightly tilted. I shook my head and grabbed it. Then I went to the milk aisle. There was a carton sitting exactly where I had picked mine up last time. At this point, my skin started to crawl. I told myself it was a coincidence. People buy bread and milk all the time, right? I moved on to the snack aisle, and there it was. The same bag of chips I had bought before, sitting on the shelf, slightly turned outward like someone had just placed it there. I swallowed hard and grabbed it. When I got to the checkout, my hands were shaking. I went to self-checkout, swiped my card, declined. The same employee from last time walked over. It was the same guy, same expression, same little chuckle. Happens every time. My stomach dropped. I stepped back, my pulse pounding. I hadn't been here in weeks. There was no every time. I mumbled something about using another card, paid, and practically ran out of the store. When I got home, I checked my bank statement. It showed 2 transactions from that store, one from just an hour earlier, but I hadn't been there. For the next few days, I avoided the store. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of clerical error, a mix-up in their system, maybe an employee accidentally rang up a similar purchase under my card. But that didn't explain the items on the shelves, placed just as I had picked them before. It didn't explain the cashier's certainty that I'd been there an hour earlier. And it definitely didn't explain the fact that someone or something had used my card. I checked my bank account obsessively. No new charges, no duplicate transactions, but the unease in my gut wouldn't leave. Then, 5 days later, I got a notification. "Your order is ready for pickup." It was from the grocery store. I hadn't ordered anything. I tapped the notification, expecting it to be a mistake, maybe an email meant for someone else. But there it was, my name, my phone number, my email, and a list of items I hadn't bought. But they were things I would buy. Bread, milk, snacks, and something else. One small mirror. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. I hadn't bought a mirror. I didn't need one, but something about seeing it on the list made my skin crawl. I almost deleted the email, but something stopped me. Instead, I called the store. The woman answered, her voice chipper but distant. "Thanks for calling." "Yeah, hi, I couldn't. I just got a notification about an order I didn't place. Can you cancel it?" There was a pause. "Too long. I'm sorry, sir, but the order has already been processed." I swallowed. "I didn't place it." Another pause. Then, very quietly, "Yes, you did." I hung up. I should have left it alone. I should have blocked the number, ignored the notification, and gone on with my life. But that mirror, it gnawed at me. What was it for? That night, I dreamt of the store, but it wasn't right. It was empty, caught me with something unseen. The aisles stretched on forever, looping in ways they shouldn't. The lights flickered, not randomly, but in a pattern like Morse code. At the checkout stood a figure. I woke up gasping, and I knew I had to go back. The parking lot was half full when I arrived, but the store felt deserted. The automatic door slid open soundlessly, swallowing me into the fluorescent void. The cashier from before wasn't there. In fact, none of the usual employees were. Instead, a single worker stood at the customer service counter, staring at me as I approached. "You're here for your order," they said. It wasn't a question. I hesitated. "Yep." They reached under the counter and pulled out a brown paper bag, neatly folded. No receipt, no branding, just a bag. I took it carefully. It was heavier than I expected. "You should check it," the employee said. Their voice was flat, wrong. I didn't want to, but my hands moved on their own. Inside was a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a bag of snacks, and a small, brown mirror. The glass was dark, too reflective, like a puddle in moonlight. I tilted it slightly and saw myself, but I wasn't moving. The reflection just stared, and then slowly it smiled. I dropped the mirror back into the bag and stumbled away from the counter. The employee watched me, unblinking. I left the store without looking back. At first, I left it on the counter untouched. I told myself I'd throw it out in the morning, but morning came, and the thought of actually touching it again made my skin crawl. So I left it, and then the sound started. The first night, I was half asleep when I heard it, a faint crinkle, like fingers brushing over paper. I shot up in bed, hard hammering, listening. Silence. I told myself it was the house settling, maybe a draft, maybe the bag shifting under its own weight. But then, the next night, it happened again, and the night after that. By the fourth night, I was too terrified to ignore it anymore. I grabbed my phone, crept into the kitchen, and turned on the flashlight. The bag sat where I left it, looking exactly the same, but I knew it wasn't. I held my breath and reached out, hesitating just before my fingers touched the paper. Then, quick as I could, I yanked it open. The loaf of bread, the milk, the snacks, and the beer. I exhaled. Everything was still there. Nothing had moved. I'd almost laughed at myself. Maybe I was just losing it. Maybe the stress was messing with my head. Then I noticed something. The mirror. It was lying face up now. I was sure it had been face down before. I swallowed hard and reached for it, bracing myself. As soon as my fingers brushed the cold glass, my phone screen flickered. For a second, just a second, the reflection lagged. I jerked my hand back, nearly dropping the mirror. My flashlight wavered, shadows stretching across the kitchen walls. I turned the mirror over, forcing myself to breathe. I needed to get rid of it. First, I tried to throw the whole bag in the trash. I tied it up, walked straight outside, and dumped it into the bin. Then I turned and power walked back inside, locking the door behind me. I felt relief for the first time in days. But that night, I woke up to a noise. The sound of paper crinkling in my kitchen. I barely managed to convince myself to check. My hands were shaking as I flipped the light on. The bag was back, sitting on the counter, untouched, like I had never thrown it away. I stopped trying to get rid of it after that. Every time I moved it, it came back. No matter where I put it, the trash, the yard, even the trunk of my car, it would always be waiting in the kitchen by the time I got back. So I left it alone. But then I started seeing things, not in real life, in the mirror. At first, it was subtle. My reflection wouldn't move exactly right, like a millisecond of lag, barely noticeable. Then it got worse. Sometimes I'd glance at it and see myself looking the wrong way, not at the mirror, but past it, like I was watching something behind me. And then last night, I woke up to a sound I can't explain, not paper, not scratching, something lower, a hum, a vibration, coming from the kitchen. I knew it was the mirror. I didn't want to go, but my body moved on its own, like something wanted me to look. The mirror was glowing, a faint, pulsy light, like something was shifting behind the glass. The reflection wasn't my kitchen anymore. It was somewhere else, dark, flickering, rug, and then I saw it, a shape, standing behind my reflection. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.